European history: the Second French Republic 1848–1852 and the Second French Empire 1852–1870. The Second French Republic 1848–1852 and the Second French Empire 1852–1870. After the fall of the Orleans monarchy in February 1848, a provisional government was established led by Alphonse Lamartine, who was a Republican, and Louis Blanc, who was a socialist, despite the fact that the two had sharp differences. The provisional government managed to set up state workshops aimed at ending unemployment in France. These workshops were later abolished by the National Assembly or Parliament in June 1848, which resulted into a civil war in France, which was later suppressed. Despite this chaotic situation, the provisional government managed to set up a constitution for France in October 1848 and went ahead to organize elections in December 1848, which Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte won against Lamartine and General Cavaignac. Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte as President 1848–1852. Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, President of the Second French Republic and later known as Napoleon Roman III, the ruler of the Second French Empire, was the son of Louis Bonaparte, King of Holland from 1806 to 1810, and a brother to Napoleon Bonaparte I. Therefore, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte was a nephew of Napoleon Bonaparte I. In 1831, while in Italy, he became a member of the Carbonari movement and he participated in their revolt against the Pope in Rome, which failed. In 1836, he tried an unsuccessful coup against Louis Philippe at Strasbourg. He was arrested and deported to USA. He made another unsuccessful coup at Boulogne in 1840. He was captured and imprisoned at Ham in northern France from 1840–1846. In 1846, he escaped from the prison and went back to exile London. In February 1848, when Louis Philippe was overthrown, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte came back to France. In December 1848, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte was elected as the President of the Second French Republic, hence coming to power in France. Factors for the rise of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to power. The success of the February 1848 revolution in France led to the rise of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to power. This revolution overthrew the Orleans monarchy under Louis Philippe and therefore created a power vacuum in France. This led to the organization of elections for a new leader where Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte emerged victorious, thus coming to power. The non-adventurous policy of Louis Philippe led to the rise of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to power. Between 1830 and 1848, France lacked a glorious foreign policy since Louis Philippe was non-interventionist. Yet the Frenchmen since the 1789 revolution had desired a glorious foreign policy. Therefore by 1848, the only person they expected to promote such a policy was Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte, since he had promised to begin from where his great-uncle Napoleon Bonaparte had stopped in 1815. His character led to his rise to power. Like his uncle Napoleon Bonaparte I, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte was an ambitious man and power-hungry. For example, he attempted to overthrow Louis Philippe in 1836 and 1840. He also took himself as the direct heir to his uncle and usually regarded himself as equal to Napoleon Bonaparte I. Therefore, when he stood for presidency in 1848, many Frenchmen voted him into power. The return of Napoleon Bonaparte's body from Saint Helena for burial by Louis Philippe in 1841 led to the rise of Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte. The return of the body made the French to remember that European history: the Second French Republic 1848–1852 and the Second French Empire 1852–1870. Economic policies. Therefore, when Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte promised glory and a strong economy like that of Napoleon I, this won him majority support. The disunity among his opponents led to his rise to power in 1848. For example, among the Republicans, some wanted to compromise with the church and the state, while others were strongly opposed to the Bourbon and Orleans houses families. The middle-class members were also against the socialists who wanted to nationalize their property. Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte therefore used such disunity to convince the masses to vote him in 1848. Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte's writings, which circulated among the Frenchmen, led to his rise to power. While in prison at Ham, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte wrote on many important issues of the day. Notable among his writings was the extinction of pauperism and the Napoleonic ideas. In all these writings, Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte outlined his plans of solving unemployment and poverty in France as well as reviving the past glory. This pleased the Frenchmen, hence voting into power. The support from the Catholic Church was another factor that enabled Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to come to power. Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte was a staunch Catholic, and he also promised to liberate the Papal States, which had been taken over by the Italian revolutionaries led by Mazzini and Garibaldi during the 1848 Italian revolutions. Since the Catholics were the majority in France, their large number of votes helped Louis-Napoleon Bonaparte to rise to power in 1848. The unpopularity of the other candidates who competed with Louis Napoleon Bonaparte enabled him to rise to power in 1848. For example, General Cavaignac, who was the Minister of War and head of the army, was hated because he had commanded the army that had killed many people in June 1848 when the workers were rioting. Lamartine was also unpopular because he had led the provisional government that abolished the national workshops that had started giving some people employment opportunities. Therefore, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte remained alone as the favourite candidate, hence explaining his rise to power. The press in France contributed to the rise of Louis Napoleon Bonaparte to power. The newspapers, magazines, and other publications extensively covered Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's election campaigns, which made him popular among the Frenchmen, hence explaining his rise to power in 1848. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte had been underestimated by his opponents, and this enabled him to defeat them. Some of his opponents had even suggested to him to step down because he was politically weak and that he was not an orator. This therefore gave Louis Napoleon Bonaparte an opportunity to defeat his opponents in the December 1848 elections. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's earlier association with the Carbonari movement in Italy gave him support from the Frenchmen, especially the liberals who wanted the Italians to be liberated from the oppressive Austrian rule. They hoped that Louis Napoleon Bonaparte would promote such interests, and therefore they voted him in large numbers. Louis Napoleon Bonaparte's manifesto paved the way for his rise to power. During the campaigns, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte put forward a manifesto that was aimed at transforming France into a modern state. He promised to revive the declining economy, improve on his social welfare, and a glorious foreign policy. This helped him to capture support from all the sections of the French European history: the Second French Republic 1848-1852 and the Second French Empire 1852-1817. Realizing that his term of office as president was due to expire in 1852, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte tried to change a provision in the constitution that stopped him from being re-elected. He failed to win the support of the parliament, and many members of the parliament started organizing for his downfall. However, Louis Napoleon Bonaparte acted fast, and in the night of 2nd December 1851 he started a brilliantly engineered coup d'état. He arrested his Republican opponents, stationed his troops in strategic places, and announced his plan to rule for another 10 years. He continued with his usual tours, persuading the Frenchmen to vote for the restoration of the empire. On 2nd December 1852 the Second French Republic ended and the Second French Empire began. This was through a plebiscite referendum organized by Louis Napoleon Bonaparte, in which over 7.8 million Frenchmen voted for the restoration of the empire against 250,000, while 2 million boycotted. He now changed his title of president, and he assumed the title of Emperor Napoleon Roman III. The domestic policy of Emperor Napoleon Roman III 1852-1870. Emperor Napoleon Roman III passed a new constitution. This constitution gave him a lot of powers, like to be the commander of the army, propose laws to be discussed by the parliament, appoint all ministers and civil servants who were required to take an oath of allegiance to the emperor and not to the parliament. Also, only candidates approved by him were allowed to stand for elections during his reign. He reorganized and strengthened the French army, which he hoped to use as a political tool to eliminate his enemies. In 1855, he introduced a conscription law by which all the Frenchmen were supposed to provide military service to the nation for some period. Those who were not ready were exempted after paying huge sums of money. In turn, Napoleon Roman III used such money to pay his officers in the army, hence making them loyal to him. Napoleon Roman III reintroduced divisions in the local government to ensure effective control of the countryside. France was once again divided into provinces, districts, and cells. In these divisions, Napoleon Roman III appointed prefects to administer them. These were given great powers to carry out his duties, and they were little emperors. For example, they had powers to appoint or dismiss teachers and doctors in government institutions, and they could even ban any society which opposed the emperor. This therefore helped Napoleon Roman III to put the entire French society under his control. Napoleon Roman III censored the press. For example, newspapers were forced to pay 50,000 francs to his government as a guarantee for their good behavior and never to publish any opposition ideas. The Minister for Internal Affairs was also given powers to suppress opposition newspapers as his own will. This therefore reduced opposition against Napoleon Roman III. Napoleon Roman III brought the intellectuals and the entire education system under his control. For example, the University of Paris was put under close government supervision. Professors and lecturers were forced to sign an oath of loyalty to the emperor, promising never to teach against his desires. He also abolished the teaching of liberal subjects like literature, history, and philosophy. This also reduced opposition against his government. He set up a strict spy network in all important places. Using this spy network, all those who opposed and criticized his government were imprisoned, killed, and exiled, hence helping Napoleon Roman III consolidate his position. European history: the Second French Republic 1848-1852 and the Second French Empire 1852-1817. prospered while production of coal, iron and steel greatly increased. He also organized exhibitions for art and industrial goods to popularize the French goods. In 1855, he organized a great exhibition which even attracted the British. This pleased the Frenchmen. In the urbanization sector, Napoleon Roman III did a lot work. He established towns and cities almost in all the districts of France. Slums were also demolished, water, gas and sewage systems were improved. All the narrow streets in Paris were widened to such an extent that Paris became the most beautiful city in the whole of Europe at that time, thus promoting the French glory. This also made Napoleon Roman III popular and therefore assisted Napoleon Roman III to consolidate his position. He improved the education system of France by establishing many secondary schools, colleges and scientific research centers. The salaries of teachers, lecturers and professors in the educational sector were also improved, hence increasing their desire to work. Such educational reforms made Napoleon Roman III popular in France. He also provided employment opportunities to the working class members who had been suffering under Louis Philippe's regime. Many of them were employed in the industries and the various commercial activities that were promoted by Napoleon Roman III industrialization policy, hence making him popular among the workers. Napoleon Roman III liberalized his empire in 1859. Due to the increasing problems in the foreign policy and the strong opposition at home, Napoleon Roman III was forced to turn himself into a liberal emperor in 1859. For example, he allowed all political exiles to return home, allowed freedom of the press, the parliament was allowed to criticize and change proposals made by the emperor, and he also legalized the workers to strike. Unfortunately, these measures opened his regime to further criticism. The foreign policy of Emperor Napoleon Roman III, 1852–1817. The foreign policy of Emperor Napoleon Roman III attempted to promote the French glory abroad, which King Louis Philippe had greatly ignored throughout his reign, and this had indeed greatly contributed to his downfall in 1848. This is reflected in the following achievements abroad. The Crimean War, 1854–1856. With a desire to protect the French interests in the Ottoman Empire, like the need to protect fellow Christians from persecution, the desire to control the holy places in Palestine, as well as the economic interests in the Mediterranean Sea, France, Britain, Turkey, and later joined by Piedmont, fought and defeated Turkey in the Crimean War of 1854–1856. The defeat of Russia resurrected the French glory or fame, which made Napoleon Roman III popular among the military generals and the Bonapartists. The war also enabled France to regain the French guardianship of the Christian holy places of Palestine. It also protected the Anglo-French interests in the Mediterranean Sea after pushing Russia out of the Black Sea. Similarly, at the end of the Crimean War, a treaty was signed in Paris, the capital of France, and this treaty was known as the Treaty of Paris of 1856. By this treaty, Russia was forced to recognize the neutralization of the Black Sea and to abandon her exclusive claims to protect the Orthodox Christians in the Ottoman Empire. This was therefore a diplomatic victory for France. Napoleon Roman III intervention in Italy, the Italian adventure of 1858–1859. As a former member of the Carbonari movement in Italy, and also due to the Italian or Piedmont's European history, the Second French Republic 1848–1852 and the Second French Empire 1852–1817. Fighting a fellow Catholic state, Austria, and therefore he was attacked. This almost led to his assassination by Orson, the leader of the Italian exiles in France. This forced Napoleon Roman III to support the Italians in their struggle for unification. He therefore signed a secret treaty of Plombières with the Prime Minister of the Italian Kingdom of Piedmont, Sardinia, known as Cavour, in July 1858. By this treaty, Napoleon Roman III promised support to liberate the Italian states of Lombardy and Venetia from Austria. Consequently, in the battles of Agrigento and Solferino of 1859, Lombardy was liberated. However, Napoleon Roman III later withdrew from the war and left Venetia in the hands of Austria. Despite his withdrawal, Napoleon Roman III secured territorial gains for France from this adventure. As a reward for his support to the Italians against Austria, the two Italian states of Savoy and Nice were given to France, and this was an achievement because it promoted the French glory abroad. In 1867, Napoleon Roman III sent the French troops to Rome. This was after an attack on Rome by the Italian revolutionaries led by Garibaldi. The French troops managed to drive Garibaldi out of Rome, and therefore Pope Pius Roman IX was kept in power in Rome. This made Napoleon Roman III popular among the French Catholics, hence an achievement. Napoleon Roman III opened the French economy to foreign trade through signing commercial treaties. For example, in 1860 he signed a commercial treaty with Britain called the Compton-Chevalier Treaty. By this treaty, the French import duties or taxes on the British goods like textiles, iron and steel, as well as hardware goods, were lowered considerably in return for British tax reductions on French goods like wines, silks and other fancy goods. Similar agreements were signed with other Western European countries. For example, there was the 1862 Anglo-Prusso-French Commercial Treaty. These commercial treaties improved international as well as commercial relations between France and the above European countries. The Mexican Adventure, 1861–1867. In 1861, due to the failure of the Mexican government to repay European loans to countries like Britain, France and Spain, a joint military force was sent by the above European powers to Mexico. This forced the Mexican government to resume its debt repayments. After this, Britain and Spain withdrew, but Napoleon Roman III kept his troops there and embarked on a far more ambitious project. Napoleon Roman III wanted to promote the French glory as well as pleasing the Catholics at home by establishing a Catholic empire in Mexico. He therefore persuaded Archduke Maximilian, brother of the Austrian emperor, to be the Emperor of Mexico. However, the Mexicans continued fighting against the French occupation, which increased the cost of maintaining the empire. Together with the pressure from USA, which warned Napoleon Roman III against violating the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, Napoleon Roman III withdrew from Mexico, leaving Archduke Maximilian isolated. As a result, Maximilian was captured and killed in 1867 by the Mexican nationalists. This damaged Napoleon Roman III's popularity because the liberals, Republicans and Catholics at home blamed him for abandoning the venture. Note: the Mexican adventure was a partial victory for Napoleon Roman III because Mexico was defeated and forced to pay her debts to the European countries. In addition, it led to the establishment of a Catholic empire in Mexico under Archduke Maximilian, although it was short-lived. European history: the Second French Republic 1848–1852 and the Second French Empire 1852–1817. Southern Germany front remained neutral in case of war between Austria and Prussia. This was agreed upon, and therefore Prussia defeated Austria in 1866. At the end of the war, Bismarck refused to honor his promise and instead publicized that Napoleon Roman III was demanding for Belgium and Luxembourg. Despite this, however, it should be noted that when Napoleon Roman III accepted the French neutrality in the Austro-Prussian War, this helped to promote peace with Prussia, thus an achievement. Napoleon AI's failures in the foreign policy. Napoleon Roman III was a warmonger which led to the loss of lives. For example, he involved France in the Crimean War of 1854–1856, which resulted into the death of 65,000 French and British soldiers. This damaged his reputation at home. He abandoned the Italian cause struggle for unification in 1859 before liberating Venetia. He instead made peace with Austria through signing the Treaty of Villafranca of 1859 with Austria without consulting Piedmont-Sardinia, which was an ally of France in the Austro-Italo-French War of 1859. Napoleon Roman III therefore betrayed the Italians, and this also undermined his credibility at home, especially among the French liberals and nationalists who wanted the Italians to be liberated from the oppressive Austrian rule. His free trade treaties with European countries had negative implications on the French economy. For example, the Cobden-Chevalier Treaty of 1860 with Britain allowed a number of British goods to flood the French markets. This generated hatred from the French manufacturers whose products were exposed to foreign competition, which made them to lose markets. This therefore made the emperor to lose his popularity at home. The Mexican Adventure of 1861–1867 had a number of shortcomings. For example, the fighting that followed the invasion of Mexico resulted into loss of lives, including Archduke Maximilian, a brother to the Austrian emperor, who was killed by the Mexican nationalists in 1867. In addition, the adventure drained the French treasury because it was very costly. It also generated hostility with USA for breaching or violating the Monroe Doctrine of 1823, which did not want any European power to intervene in the American affairs. The Austro-Prussian or 7 Weeks' War of 1866 also exposed Napoleon Roman III's weaknesses. This was a war between Austria and Prussia, but France under Emperor Napoleon Roman III decided to remain neutral. This French neutrality enabled Prussia to easily defeat Austria in 1866, which promoted the Prussian supremacy in Europe at the expense of the French power. He also demanded for German territories that were located in the west of River Rhine as compensation for France's neutrality in the war, which generated hostility with Prussia. He also secretly proposed to take over Luxembourg and Belgium. However, the demand for Belgium that had been declared neutral by the great powers in the London Conference of 1839 greatly annoyed Britain, hence isolating France in Europe. The Franco-Prussian War 1870–1871. Due to the misunderstandings between France and Prussia after the Austro-Prussian War of 1866, Napoleon Roman III went to war with Prussia in 1870–1871. Unfortunately, France was defeated at the Battle of Sedan in 1871. Napoleon Roman III himself was taken as a prisoner of war, and according to the Frankfurt Treaty of 1871 that ended the war, France lost territories to Prussia like the rich provinces European history: the Second French Republic 1848-1852 and the Second French Empire 1852-1817.